Penn Jillette on the big free FM. That's pennradio@gmail.com. Pennradio.com, PENNRADIO.com. But we now have, and this is a big hero of mine. I guess since you're here, I'll have you say who the hell you are. One of the founders of Greenpeace.
Yeah, I was doing a PhD in ecology in Vancouver, where I'm from, in the late 60s, and became radicalized and became an environmentalist, and then joined the small committee of people. They were called the Don't Make a Wave Committee at that time, soon to become Greenpeace. And I was in the planning team and on the first voyage of Greenpeace against U.S. hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska in 1971. And that began a 15-year full-time career as an international director of Greenpeace. By the time I left in 1986, we had grown from a church basement in Vancouver to a group with 100 million U.S. coming in every year and offices in 21 countries.
Then you left Greenpeace in, 86?
I left Greenpeace in 86 because I didn't like the way it was drifting. Basically what happened in the mid-'80s, by that time, a majority of people agreed with us. We had become mainstream, whereas in the early 70s, we were a real fringe group, and a lot of people thought, these guys are protesting U.S. hydrogen bomb tests. They must be a bunch of commie pinkos. Then maybe they're on the Kremlin side.
But by 86, you were a bunch of commie pinkos.
Well, yeah, in a sense. In the sense that the commie pinkos took over the organization is how I see it. And, but it wasn't just that. It was also the extremism. I think we have to differentiate between extremism and political leaning. Extremism, for example, would be a campaign to ban chlorine worldwide. That's got nothing to do with politics, particularly, whether you're left or right. Whereas the ultra-left element that came into the environmental movement was because world communism failed, and a whole lot of peaceniks and political activists who didn't have a focus on nuclear war anymore moved into the environmental movement, bringing their neo-Marxism with them, learned to use green language in a very clever way to cloak agendas that are really more about anti-globalization and anti-capitalism than they are about science or ecology. Not that those aren't legitimate subjects, but I think it's misinformation to cloak anti-globalization and anti-capitalism in green language to make it appear as though it's an environmental issue. So those two things combined. The reason for the extremism was because now that a majority of people agreed with us, the only way, with all our reasonable positions, the only way to remain anti-establishment and confrontational, adversarial, was to adopt ever more extreme positions. They eventually abandoned science and logic altogether in these zero-tolerance policies.
I want to talk about nuclear power, something that a lot of people have flip-flopped on many times, and there's a lot of information about. I'm from Greenfield, Massachusetts, and my brother-in-law, Ed, worked at, he had the Homer Simpson job. He was a maintenance guy at Yankee Atomic Plant in Vermont, I think.
Vermont Yankee, yeah.
Yeah, Vermont Yankee. And he worked there, and I got he was able to give me a tour where I got to go and wear the little badge to see how much radiation I got as a kid, and I was really interested in the science. And although he was a maintenance man, he was very knowledgeable in science and loved talking about it and everything. But he had really short hair. He had a crew cut, in 1970. So as I started to grow my hair, listen to rock and roll, the whole thing, nuclear power, became to me a guy with a crew cut that really didn't get it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what year the No Nukes concert was. Do you know? The Bruce Springsteen, the Clash. I mean, really everybody cool in the world. Everybody that I love.
Jackson Brown.
Did
Bonnie
this
Raitt.
huge No Nukes thing.
Exactly.
And it took me until No Nukes to realize that I was just swept up in a culture that was actually, it was the culture that I was embracing, and I was embracing the culture on a scientific issue. And it occurred to me that the few people I read that actually had science backgrounds were disagreeing with the No Nukes people, or I should say, were for nuclear power.
Yes.
And the people that were against nuclear power were people like Bruce Springsteen and Jackson Brown.
Guitar players.
Seemed ludicrous, and I was getting my scientific information from people who played guitar. So it was a real change for me. Now, you started out thinking about, as you said, nuclear war. But
yes,
were you
and we just saw all
power?
things nuclear as part of the Holocaust, potentially. And I have to admit, I bought in to the anti-nuclear movement on the issue of safety which in retrospect, the nuclear industry is one of the safest industries that's ever been created. If you look at the actual stats of people, and when you recognize that Chernobyl was actually an exception, in a way, the one that proves the rule that nuclear is generally safe, and you look at 3 Mile Island, it was actually a success story from the point of view of being a serious internal accident in the reactor, like a partial meltdown of the core. Not much worse can happen. It was a big economic mistake, but it didn't hurt anybody. The containment vessel worked, and that's what the engineers designed it to do. So I would much rather have a bunch of engineers with crew cuts who do not smoke dope on the job, right? Looking after my nuclear power plants than I would have a bunch of guitar-playing hippies.
Well, you know, the thing that a friend of mine who is very pro-nuclear power said that after 3 Mile Island, some people were killed by 3 Mile Island because that reactor being taken offline meant we used more coal power, and people mining coal actually...
Good argument. And do most people know that coal-fired power plants emit hundreds of times more radiation than nuclear power plants do because there's radon in the emissions from coal-fired power plants?